In this chapter's lessons, we'll discuss how we'll manage the data in the iMusic application. In this lesson, we'll begin by creating our data model objects. During our discussion of Objective-C, we had built two key objects, artist and album. And in this lesson, we'll create the real versions of these that we'll use in the app. Let's begin by creating a group for our models. I'll right-click and say New Group, and give this the name Models. Let's also clean up our controllers while we're here. I'll Command-click on these files, on the About View controller files, and the same thing with the Main View controller files. And right-click and say New Group from Selection. Give this the name Controllers. And let's highlight the iMusic group and go up to the Edit menu and select Sort by Name. So now we have a nicely sorted group. Let's highlight the Models group and go up to the File menu and select New File. Select the Tap Harmonic group, and I'll select Objective-C class and click Next. So the first model object I'll create is an artist. Click Next. Make sure both of our targets are checked, and click Create. This time I'll type Command-N and bring up the new template chooser. Objective-C class, Next, and I'll call this one Album. Alright, so we have our two model files, artist and album. Let's start defining the artist class. I'll start by defining the artist properties. So I'm going to define two properties, an artist ID of type NSU integer, so an unsigned integer type, and artist name of type NSString. Let me go and synthesize these. To simplify the creation of an artist, let's also add a couple custom initializer methods. So we'll add a class method called artistWithID name and an initWithID. And I'll implement these methods. So the initWithID will first call superinit and then initialize each one of its properties with the values passed in. And then our class method will simply call this initializer. So that we can more easily debug this class, let's also override the description method. The description method is provided by NSObject, and by default, whenever we print an object to the console, it simply logs the object name, usually followed by its hash code, I believe. But by overriding the description method, we can control what that output format looks like. So in this case, I'm going to create a string with format, passing in placeholders for the ID and the name. And by overriding this method, it'll make it a little bit easier to identify this when we're debugging. I'll switch over to the album class. Let me import the artist. So we're defining quite a few more properties here. We'll have an album ID, an album name, the image URL string, and this will be the URL to go and load the album cover artwork. Price, the iTunes URL string, and this will be the location on the iTunes store. Its release date, its genre, and then a reference to our artist class. Let me discuss this relationship between artist and album. In a more complex data model, the artist would typically be the owning instance and would own one or more album objects. But in our case, since the album is really the central focus of the app, we're going to make this the owning instance, and it's going to own an instance of the artist. Let me switch over to the implementation, and I'll synthesize those. And just like we did with the artist, let's also add a description method to this class as well. Now we could choose to print out some additional properties if we want to aid in our debugging, but for right now, simply printing the album ID and the album name will be sufficient. We've defined our two key entities, added some properties and methods, and we're ready to continue on to the next lesson.